everyone. Thank you. Thanks for being here. This is the second Wilkin Chair Series event. The first one was last week. We had a great success with debate bingo. Anybody here there at that time? Couple? Yeah. Okay. I'm happy to see you all here. This is a very important topic, journalism and democracy, the ethical responsibility of the Fourth Estate. I'm very pleased to have Morgan Trau with us from WEWS. Her work also appears in the Ohio Capital Journal. And is it WCPO? Is that right? In Cincinnati. Okay. All right. Here's how we came to be with Morgan doing this for us. I don't know Morgan personally. I did work in the business for a long time, but I did not meet her when I was there. I do read her work in the Ohio Capital Journal, and it so impressed me that I thought we definitely have to have her on, have to have her here and let everyone hear the benefit of how she has gotten to where she is and how she's fighting to preserve democracy herself. So I do have her bio there on the table, but I wanted to read just a few quick things. She is an award-winning State House reporter. She is known for holding politicians accountable. It sounds like she was in an interesting story today, too. So hopefully she'll tell us a little bit about that. But her work has appeared on in the Washington Post, the New Yorker, Politico, The Guardian, ABC News, CBS News, MSNBC, Times of Israel, The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. Okay, we got to hear more about that. And, you know, she's been cited in research papers and so on, as you can see in the bio there. She is a graduate of Syracuse, and I think she did a lot of work while she was in college, too. Students, take note. So I will turn it over to her. She does have a presentation for us, and then we'll open it up for questions. When we do open for questions, we'd like for people to come up so that she can hear you. This is why we have this set up, so that she can hear and see you when you ask your questions. But we will get there. First, we're going to turn it over to her and let us hear what she has to say about preserving democracy. Thanks, Morgan.
No, thank you so much. Can everybody hear me okay? I hope so. Yes?
Can you hear
I'm
me?
going to take, oh, I can't hear anybody else, but as long as you can hear me, I'm just going to go.
You go right ahead.
Okay. Well, hi. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. Yeah, anything else that you want to talk about with the history? I'm going to touch on a couple different points. I don't want this to feel like it's a lecture. So I know that we have a presentation that I'm going to give, but please feel free. You know, you can reach out at any time. You can stand up. You can ask about certain things that I'm talking about. I want this to be as collaborative as possible because democracy involves everybody. So I'm very excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is awesome. I am going to share my screen. Hopefully everybody can see it. Okay. So you should be able to see my presentation if I can play it from the start. So I really loved the title of this, the Investigating, Fact-Checking, and Reporting to Preserve Democracy. So that is what I do. It's how I got into the journalism field. I really wanted to be a type of reporter that shows what's going on in our government. So as you can see on this page, there are a lot of different types of journalism. There's watchdogs, explanatory, and I'll go through what some of these are, but there's a plenty of different types. These are only some of them. So what I do, I'm a watchdog. That is the main thing. So watchdogs are people that look at the government, evaluate the government, and it combines explanatory, fact-checking, and investigative. So my job is basically to explain what's going on in the government, hold politicians accountable, and fact-check claims that powerful people or not so powerful people make. So an average day for me, and we can get more into this if we're interested in this. So this is a non-investigative day, and I can talk a little bit about the story I did today as well. So in the morning, I will pitch story ideas to my bosses. We have an assignment meeting. Today, I didn't have to pitch, but usually I pitch story ideas, things I've been working on, things I've investigated. And then the producers decide what they like and what they don't like. I set up my interviews. This could either be, calling people, cold calling, walking up to people on the street, or going to a press conference, going to a hearing. Then once I gather all of that sound, I write it. So I transcribe everything. I write it together for the broadcast piece. So the 2-minute piece that you would see on your TV. After that, I edit all of it together, and then the report airs. So sometimes that involves live shots. Sometimes that involves just having me on camera pre-recorded. Other times I'm not on TV at all. And then I have to, after all of that, I have to write the digital article. So that's where a lot of my work, you'll be able to see it online afterwards. So for example, today, I was out in Portage County, so Northeast Ohio. It is a county that is called a pivot. They voted for Obama, but then they switched to Trump. So it's a very interesting area for elections. So I didn't pitch the story today, but I heard over the weekend that there was some concerns that voters were having with the sheriff of the county. The sheriff of the county put on Facebook some remarks about how if you see somebody with a Kamala Harris sign in their yard, you should write down their address. Some voters saw this as intimidating. So we tried to get to the bottom of what that was. The sheriff did not respond to us, but we did talk to the county Republican Party, who did say, hey, he didn't actually mean to be racist in what he said. And, you know, we can maybe go over that. I can go further into depth about the comments he made. He used some racial epithets, and then also said this was all about immigration. So when you go out there, you go out, you talk to people on the street, ask them their opinions. A lot of people already knew that this situation was going on. Portage isn't the largest county in the state. And yeah, you interview people, you get each side of the story, you write that together, you kind of slam it and make sure it makes air at 5 p.m. today. Okay, branches of government. I promise this is not going to be a lecture. There's the executive, legislative, and judicial, but the fourth estate is the press. So especially for watchdogs, the responsibility is to inform the public and hold government officials accountable. So watchdog journalism, it's basically about promoting transparency. You're telling the public what they should know about the government. The way that laws are written that way for a reason. There, of course, there's a side of it where, you know, it has to be the way that fits with the Constitution. It has to make sense legally, but also they're hard to read. That's not an accident. So really, if you're not involved in politics, it's hard to get involved. So my job is to break down laws and bills and things that you see to show you how it actually impacts you. Also, if more people know what's going on in their government, they're better able to make decisions, and they would probably be more involved. Civic engagement's really important. Knowing what's going on is a lot harder than just kind of brushing it off and saying, oh, this is really complicated. I don't want to deal with it. But if you have somebody who's able to explain it, it makes it a lot easier to sort of know what's going on and be interested in it. So I have a story that sort of goes through Watchdog. I will give you a fair warning. My voice right now is different than my broadcast voice. So hopefully it's not too much of a shock for you. I hope that you can hear this. I'm not sure if you'll be able to, so somebody step up if you can't hear it, because I also have it attached to YouTube. So hopefully you can hear it though.
For months, advocates have argued that issue 1, which would make it harder to amend the Ohio Constitution, is actually about trying to make it harder to legalize abortion. But on November 17th, 2022, Secretary of State Frank LaRose said otherwise.
That's not what this kind of a change should ever be about.
Ohioans will likely get the choice this November of enshrining reproductive rights in law.
Why are you doing it now? Because it's ready now.
Every single time LaRose has been asked if issue 1 was related to an abortion vote, he has denied it.
If this is about one specific issue, then somebody's not really focused on what we're trying to accomplish here.
But the words he said to reporters appear different than when he spoke to his supporters. Here's what he said just last month.
This is 100% about keeping a radical pro-abortion amendment out of our Constitution.
A video obtained by News 5 from Scanner Media shows the secretary at Lincoln Day in Seneca County, with what advocates call saying the quiet part out loud.
It is utterly shameful that Secretary LaRose or anyone would work to take this freedom away from us for just one issue.
Jen Miller with the League of Women Voters explains that LaRose was the one who first put forward the idea of raising the threshold for a constitutional amendment to pass from a simple majority to 60%. This would change the way the Constitution has worked for more than 110 years.
This is again about corrupt politicians and special interest groups trying to trick everyday Ohio people into taking our own rights away.
LaRose has continuously denied that his idea is related to any specific policies. In the video, he adds that although it is about abortion now, it would be useful down the road to combat what he calls the less dangerous plans.
The next thing they want to do is put a $15 an hour minimum wage in our state constitution. And who knows what's next? Marijuana.
We tried reaching out for days to talk to LaRose, but his team refused to answer our questions. They did give us a statement. Their spokesperson said, in part, we need to elevate the standard for amending our state constitution, whether it's healthcare, minimum wage, casinos, or any other special interest agenda. Issue 1 applies to an unlimited number of political issues. That's the point. But at the Lincoln Day event, this was the message.
It's 100% about keeping a radical pro-abortion amendment out of our Constitution. And this is one of the ways that we can make sure that they're not successful.
The Secretary of State's office should be a nonpartisan position. And this just shows that politics are creeping into how Secretary LaRose runs his office, and that's disappointing.
Additionally, in the Seneca County video, the secretary says he hopes to have an announcement this summer to make about running for U.S. Senate. At the Ohio State House, I'm Morgan Trau reporting.
Okay, so this video was, if you can't tell, I should have said this earlier, was from last summer. So this was ahead of the August special election. August special election, so many counties, mostly Republican counties, voted down the August special election, what the lawmakers were trying to do. So what the advocate was saying in the piece is, this is a nonpartisan issue. This is really, politicians versus the people. And so those are the stories that I tend to do, working for the people. So with this story, what ended up happening was this was then used, this clip that I obtained was then used in every ad, which I have no say in. If people use me in ads, if people use other people in political ads, we have no say in that as reporters, because it's fair use. So they ended up using this, and it helped prevent this from passing because people realized it was about a specific thing, and you'd be basically getting rid of majority rule for this one specific thing. It also goes back and forth between the timeline of, hey, he's saying this at this point, but this isn't the same as what he's saying now. So another video, but politicians on both sides of the aisle, they do not like watchdog journalism. This is not specific to Republicans. This is not specific to Democrats. This is any elected official. And, some might say that they do like it as long as they're not the target. So when it comes to this, you're going to see there's some headlines about what this is about. We talk about bribery scheme. It's very complicated, so I am happy to go more into it. House Bill 6 is the largest bribery scheme in state history. It led one man in Ohio, the former Speaker of the House, to be in prison for 20 years. I covered that trial. Basically, there's some knowledge right now, or there's some information, text messages that I found that show that the governor and lieutenant governor were potentially aware of what was going on. So with this situation, we're going to go through a little bit of a back and forth that I have with politicians. You can see what kind of questions, and it will probably be uncomfortable to watch at certain points because it is, because it's aggressive. So with this, you're going to see a lot of the governor, and you're going to see other Republican politicians. That is because we are a supermajority state. There's nothing against Republicans. It's just that they are the ones that happen to be in power. When I worked in Washington state, I did the same thing, but with Democrats. So.
Why should ratepayers believe you that you didn't have anything to do with this?
Didn't have anything to do with what?
The corruption scheme.
I'm trying to count the years, 45 years in public office, 45 years without any kind of personal scandal.
But there are text messages saying that there's $500,000 that was going to a dark money PAC and that they were going to call you about it. Do you understand how that concerns people?
Oh, I think I've answered the question.
You are appointing somebody to the Supreme Court who has no judicial experience and who is a friend of the family. Can you walk me through that decision-making process?
Sure. I chose Joe Dieters because I know him. I trust him. Joe Dieters has a wealth of experience in all of those areas. I think he brings unique talent to the Ohio Supreme Court. And I'm very, very proud to nominate him.
Wealth of experience, just not being a judge.
First of all,
You may still put up another constitutional amendment. How is that not going against the will of the
what I
people?
said, and so what I'm not going to say is never, never, never would I ever do that. I'm not going to say that.
Representatives, Attorney General, all of you say that you are pro-life. How do you reckon with advocating for a new method for capital punishment?
Well,
Gun violence has continued to increase for years, yet DeWine has signed every bill loosening firearm restrictions that has hit his desk, even after a mass shooting.
Do you feel like you've been complicit in signing that?
I think that I'm again asking this year the legislature to look at the bill that we rolled out right after the Oregon and Dayton, that tragedy. Our bill would give you the right to go into court. You'd have to prove that. You'd have to convince the judge. Then and only then would the guns be taken away from that individual. And again, urge the legislature to take action on this.
But you still signed permitless carry.
But
But that has nothing to do with the text about the bribery scheme.
I don't know what you're talking about. We weren't involved. Texts that other people share amongst themselves have nothing to do with me. I wasn't involved in that conversation.
How were you ignorant of their behavior then? There were phone logs of you talking to them more than 20 times.
I wasn't involved in it. That was Larry Householder. And there are no texts between me and him.
Okay, so as you can see, it's pretty hostile. The governor is a very good sport about it. He knows me. He sighs when I walk into a press conference. You'll have different reactions depending on who you talk to. You'll also have different reactions depending on the topic. Obviously, as you can see with the lieutenant governor, it struck a nerve. The governor is more even keel when it comes to questions like this. He's more prepared. But when it comes to lawmakers or it comes to other elected officials, you never know how somebody's going to react. But at the end of the day, that is what is most important, is getting those answers for the citizens, asking questions that might be uncomfortable or might make people nervous around you, but it's for the good of democracy. So dealing with pushback, this is something I get all the time. This is something that I have grown to be used to. As you can see on the left, this actually happens. This tweet from Frank LaRose, our Secretary of State, he sent this yesterday. So I deal with pushback all the time. As you can see, my tweet that he quote tweeted, I say, in his hunt for unsubstantiated widespread voter fraud, Secretary of State LaRose has accused prosecutors of ignoring his referrals of election rigging. Law enforcement officials explain the secretary's cases of fraud have no merit. That story, I evaluate both Frank LaRose's point of view and then the county prosecutors that he's saying are purposely ignoring voter fraud. I went to the county prosecutors and they explained to me, we're not ignoring voter fraud. He's just sending us cases that, he'll say that, oh, this person voted twice in both, this county and this county. And the prosecutors find out that they're different people. So they can't convict anybody from that because there's no case there. So his response, I don't usually waste time with Morgan because she's paid by foreign funded leftist operations to attack me. Unclear where that comes from. I am paid by EW Scripts based out of Cincinnati. We're the spelling bee people. So you got to get used to things like that. As long as your work speaks for itself, then you shouldn't be worried. But it is sometimes worrying. In my first market, when I would get into it with politicians, I never really knew what to do. But you have to learn to live with it. Unfortunately, that's just how it is. It's gotten worse over the past couple of years with the way that social media has advanced. And you also have to get used to your reputation, being that you are either argumentative or you are annoying. I think it's especially worse for women. So if you're a woman in news or a woman in politics, you face more hardships just because they aren't as used to seeing women. It's definitely like an older male profession still. So you also have to consider the source. What do they have to lose and what do they have to gain from this? So obviously this story, although it didn't say anything negative about Frank LaRose, what does he have to lose from being confronted by prosecutors saying basically, stop attacking us, your cases aren't great, they don't have merit. So what does he have to gain and lose from that? Well, he's the head of elections. Obviously, he doesn't want to be seen as not correct in what he's putting out to his boards of elections or constituents. He lost in the primary. He's trying to rebuild his reputation. He has other goals of running in the future, and that's totally fine. But you have to evaluate, okay, so my tweet had like 400 retweets on it. He wanted to respond to it because people were upset with him. Also depends on your mantra, ignore or fight back. I used to fight back on Twitter in my old market, and I realized that it's not worth it. So what I do now is ignore them because there's always going to be somebody unhappy. If you're doing a good job as a journalist, there's going to be somebody unhappy with the story. And it's good when both sides are either like unhappy because you want it to be fair. You always want it to be fair no matter what. Even when you're holding people accountable, you still want to, even though some politicians don't talk to me anymore, you still want to get their perspective. So I'll go to a legal professor and be like, can you explain this point of view? So there's always going to be people who are able to talk about your story. So you should be fine with it. The work speaks for itself, but ignore it or fight back. I tend to ignore it because it doesn't bother me, but I know that for younger reporters or for reporters that aren't as used to it, they'll want to fight back. And I don't think that there's a wrong answer in either of those. Other thing is, once you start being a watchdog reporter, others will defend you. I think that's another reason why I don't fight back is because if you look at his tweet, there's like 40 response to it and everybody's saying that he's wrong for attacking me because I had nothing to do with this. It's just the history of it. So there's a lot of different ways to deal with pushback. You just gotta be okay with people not liking you. And I think that's a hard thing. So protecting yourself. If you want to be a journalist or if you want to be a watchdog journalist or you're just interested in this, you got to make sure the story is fair before it airs. You have to. It doesn't matter if you don't like somebody. It doesn't matter if you have your own personal beliefs. You have to make sure it's fair. When I do stories like that story about abortion or like my interrogations about bribery schemes or, other kinds of criminal investigations, holding people accountable, you have to make sure it's fair. Getting a second or third set of eyes too is always super, super helpful because that way nobody can accuse you of bias or saying, hey, you didn't get my point of view. You always want to make sure to do that. If you're working with an outlet, you probably have a legal team. So that's another thing, having a second or third set of eyes who look at that so you don't get sued. Record every minute of the interview. So I did a story a couple years ago where an Ohio lawmaker told me that unprompted, but we should in school be hearing both sides of the Holocaust. We published that, but also published the raw tape of it to show that I didn't bait her. I didn't bring it up. She brought it up randomly. I asked a follow-up question being like, what do you mean both sides of the Holocaust? So I included all of that because I knew already it was going to be a controversial story. Published the raw tape, as I just said. And if you feel threatened after a story airs, which I have, make sure to take care of yourself. Do not brush it off. Talk to your management. Sometimes you have to get police involved. Unfortunately, I mean, there was a reporter, an investigative reporter that was killed in Las Vegas for investigating a Democratic politician. This is something that does happen, and you have to be careful. I've had people in other markets, and I've had people in this market, you know, follow me home. I've had people dox me. I've had people show up to my door. There's a lot of different things that can happen, especially if you are, you know, trying to hold powerful people accountable. Once again, this is all about holding powerful people accountable. So the challenges that journalists face right now. Right now, I would say that social media is the biggest challenge that I face, and that I think a lot of other journalists face when it comes to misinformation, disinformation, chaos. Social media is great. I love it, but it's also so hard to deal with when you're trying to fact check. So let's talk a little bit about Springfield. If you're not familiar with the situation, it's been all over national news right now. Springfield, Ohio, it's outside of Dayton. There is a conspiracy theory about Haitian immigrants who are eating pets. There is no credibility to this at all. So let's talk about how this happened. On Facebook, a Springfield resident wrote in a Facebook group that Haitian immigrants were carving up her neighbor's daughter's friend's cat. That was what the quote was. And she added in it, but I don't think I'm the most credible source. From there, here's my timeline. So that happened on September 5th. On September 6th, a conservative Twitter account, or X, tweets it out. And in the ensuing days, it just got bigger. Right-wing influencers started posting about it. And by September 9th, JD Vance, who is up for VP with Donald Trump, he started talking about it. Springfield, then the same day that JD Vance started talking about it, Springfield had to also talk about it, and they denied all allegations. They have a Republican mayor. He said, this is not true. This is not credible. This is not happening. So then September 10th, Trump brings up these allegations during the debate. That really set everything into the national space. And by September 11th, Governor DeWine had to get involved. He decided to hold a press conference and say, hey, we're going to be sending support to this area because there is an influx of Haitian immigrants, legal immigrants, who went from Haiti to the area on asylum legally because Springfield was dying as a city. They were losing population and weren't growing. There was so many jobs that couldn't be filled. And with the Haitian immigrants that have come over the past decade, they've helped fill that gap. The Springfield residents, they love their neighbors. They don't want to be a part of this. So what there was a struggle with is with inflation, housing has become a problem. So there are problems related to the influx of people coming, but they came legally and they're not eating your pets. So Governor DeWine, from September 11th, has had to go on a media tour, basically, on all national and local news saying, nobody's eating pets. This is not happening in Springfield. Please stop. This is not helpful. So by September 12th, up to now, there have been bomb threats constantly because of this. You know, schools have been closed, colleges, all campus has been online, hospitals have been shut down because of these bomb threats. So, and then on September 15th, JD Vance had an interview with CNN where he said, the American media totally ignored this stuff until Donald Trump and I started talking about cat memes. If I have to create stories so that the American media actually pays attention to the suffering of the American people, then that's what I'm going to do. So when it comes to what's true and what's not, and fact checking what's on social media, things exploded very quickly, faster than any reporter was able to shut it down. JD Vance then continued to say, well, I'm not making it up, but it helps leverage the conversation. There's nobody eating cats. There's nobody eating dogs. That's not happening. So when it comes to this is why it's so important that reporters are able to counter this kind of rhetoric and able to counter, hey, we should not just be regurgitating what we see online. And also holding politicians accountable. Politicians should not be able to say a random thing and everyone believe it. That's the point of watchdog journalists. No matter what side you're on, politicians don't always tell the truth. So right now, the biggest attack on journalists and what they cause. Undermining public trust is probably the biggest one. It can create confusion over what information is reliable. That's why, with all the Springfield situation, people didn't know which sources were legitimate or not. Basically, it makes it harder for people to be informed. It also weakens accountability. It's easier for politicians like Frank LaRose from the tweet that I had mentioned to blame fake news than to answer for actions. It's very, very easy to do that. It's obviously ramped up since 2016, 2015, where the whole fake news rhetoric, but that's not new. That's happened during the Holocaust. It happened before the Holocaust. Fake news has always been a trend for politicians to say what they want and blame reporters for not covering it accurately. It encourages not great forms of government. Authority, cannot talk right now. Basically, it discredits anybody who challenges what the government says. It makes it easier to control narratives, manipulate public opinion, and avoid any kind of pushback that they could get. If they can control the narrative, no matter what party you are, no matter who you are, obviously that's going to work out better in your favor. It also fosters polarization and division. Media has really become a scapegoat right now. People are seeing certain news outlets as enemies, whether you are a Democrat and see, Fox News as an enemy, or you're a Republican and see CNN as the enemy. It promotes disinformation. They might turn to less credible or partisan sources because people don't see local news as legitimate because, so my Channel 5 station, it's totally run locally, but it's an ABC station. So for people who aren't as familiar with how local news works, they could say, oh, well, I don't like ABC, so this local reporter who's only covering this area of Northeast Ohio, they're clearly fake and I can't trust what they're saying. It also can endanger journalist safety. There have been times where I was in other markets and, people threatened to do horrific things to me, to my face, when I was covering rallies, when I was covering different events. People showed weapons to me, threatened me. Obviously, I did not have anything happen to me, I guess, in a more dangerous way, but it limits the ability for the free press. So really, watchdogs are here for the people, accountability, making sure that the government isn't lying to the citizens. I want to work for the people, not for the government. I don't want to regurgitate what they say. There are times and places for all different types of reporters. And this is not to say that other reporters who cover the government who aren't watchdogs, those are still needed. It's just different forms and different formats. So really, it's about making sure that politicians don't screw you over. So legitimate sources. Okay. Your local news stations and your local newspapers, they have your best interest in mind. They live in the community oftentimes, and they are dealing with the same problems that you're dealing with. Think like the Toledo Blade. So statewide newspapers, like the Ohio Capital Journal, we're all based out of Columbus, but we travel all over the state. We talk to people from all over. We get all different points of view. So journalists from credible news organizations on social media. So following journalists from either local news, national news, people that you know are legitimate, follow them on social media because it's so easy to follow a news influencer or somebody who is partisan but acting as though they are part of news. Network news is also better than cable news. So be cautious with cable. Those would be your Fox and your CNNs, MSNBCs, because they have different guidelines. They have different communication guidelines than local does or network. You know, they don't have to always be truthful. They don't have any of the disclaimers that we would have. We could get fined for saying things that aren't true, whereas they do not because they're classified as entertainment. So fact checking, this is my quick guide. I could get more into this. I have all different resources of what I use to help fact check. You want to first, obviously, check the source's credibility. If it's from something you've never heard of, it might be real, it might not be. So you should look up the source. Sometimes Wikipedia will have like, oh, this magazine, this is made by, or it's run by this, you know, super liberal political action committee that gets funded by who knows where, or, you know, this is run by a conservative think tank. It's not actual, you know, news media. Examine the author, same thing. Same thing with the credibility for the source. Cross-referencing, I think, is the best way, the easiest way. If you see something from one reporter or one influencer online, Google what they're saying to see if it comes up anywhere else. Even if it's like, it comes up on, you know, another source that you do know is legitimate. That way you can see, oh, this person's talking about something literal. Be very skeptical. I'm skeptical of everything. It's be cynical. If something seems too good to be true, it likely is. Or if something seems too bad to be true, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But if there's something that just fits a narrative so perfectly, it likely is embellished. You want to check for bias in the reports. So same thing with the credibility. And also slow down, read the full article before sharing it. Activists on each side of the aisle, they will hype things up and they will only post like the headline. Headline is not the full story. So you want to be sure to read all of it because things can get taken out of context. Things can get taken basically any way that you don't want it to go as a journalist. So that's all for me. Hopefully that answered some questions about journalism and democracy. I'm happy to take any questions, and also reach out to me at any time. I mean, this is the thing is, even though I report for News 5 Cleveland, so entirety of the Northeast Ohio area plus Southwest Ohio with Cincinnati, and then all over the state with the Capital Journal. My work appears on like the Dayton Daily News and Akron Beacon Journal, and it's aired in Toledo a couple times. So please, anything that you think is going on in your community, if it relates to a politician, if it relates to city corruption or anything like that, I'm always happy to hear about it. Or if you just want to talk journalism, feel free to reach out whenever.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear
Okay.
you.
We're going to open it up for questions. Does anybody have a
Yeah.
question they would like to ask Morgan? You want to come on up and ask her?
Hi, Morgan. Thank you for sharing that you found texts that had to do with the bribery scandal that were passed between people who said they didn't have anything to do with the bribery scandal. Can I ask where you found those texts?
Yeah, totally. So I did a bunch of different records requests to be able to get those. So in connection with, my team at the Capital Journal, we joined in with a couple other newspapers. We put forward a huge records request for the Ohio Consumers Council. So they've been investigating First Energy, and they've been investigating the lawmakers who are allegedly involved in it. So it was for a couple months in a row, every Friday, thousands of documents would be released. And I went through every single one of them, and I found it. It took a long time. We had, my team, we had different Excel sheets of all the different text messages, who they're referencing, but we still, I mean, I probably haven't gone through half of them still. It's so records requests, FOIAs are your friends. Anything that involves getting access to records, that would be it. And so, yes, that was from a records request that I got all of them.
Hi, Morgan. Thank you. My question is a follow-up. Could you just say a little more about requesting records, especially if you might be just an average citizen who would like to know more? How dogged do you have to be? What process do you go through? What kind of advice do you have if you're getting frustrated and you're ready to give up?
Oh yeah, records requesting is a long process, but I actually have a format that I use that I'm happy to provide of what that looks like. So FOIAs, they are is under sunshine laws and federal and statewide, you are able to request anything that could be seen as important to the public. So people don't know this, but actually you don't need a certain format. You don't need to say like under this law, as long as you reach out to the office and say, consider this a public records request. It could just be like a couple lines of being like, hey, I want this from this date at this time, and they have to give it to you. And if they don't give it to you, then that's a problem. And that's a First Amendment violation, and you can sue for that. But it's easier if you are looking for something as a citizen, it might take a little bit longer than somebody who's in the media because they're more scared of the media saying, hey, you know, I've been waiting for this records request for months, than they are of, unfortunately, of people who are citizens. So you do have to be pretty persistent. I still have records that I'm waiting for months. I still have like a list of them, but I'm happy to share I have like a whole list of what I use to copy and paste, send it. You do have to be somewhat specific depending on which office, but I have like a whole guideline on how to do that I've shared with my colleagues at my station who aren't political reporters. So I'd be happy to provide that.
Other questions? Victoria? You have one more coming up?
You mentioned that local journalism tends to be more trustworthy and safe than other forms, but what about things like the Sinclair Broadcasting and other of these like Pink Slime News or like must air thingies?
Yeah, you know, I completely understand that. I personally do not ever believe in must airs. I know that Sinclair does that. I've never worked for Sinclair. I do know that reporters who do work for companies that do that have a lot of problems with it. When it comes to local media conglomerates, they're like other ones. However, when it comes to the local journalist and the actual efforts of the newsroom, they tend to be more trustworthy, even with the Sinclair stations that do have the must airs. Yes, are those a huge concern? Of course they are. It's horrible that there are must airs, but those must airs, those come from higher up. Those don't come from the actual newsroom. So no actual newsroom is sitting there being like, oh, we're going to read the same kind of propaganda that like 60 other states are going to have. I remember there was a video I watched in college of a bunch of different local news anchors reading the same thing. That should never happen. And that is really scary. But by and large, local news is way more trustworthy, even though there are things like that happen. You know, Sinclair, they have what, like 80 stations across the country. Scripps has 60, 70. Nexstar has probably like 100. There's a bunch of different ones, but each one should be run by itself. But yeah, 100%. There are problems with media and with local news. You can't always trust it, but it's more trustworthy than some other forms such as cable.
Hi, Morgan. So I had a question regarding, You talk about obviously watchdog journalism and being for the people. And this summer I had my first encounter with people asking for off-the-record conversations. With politicians, have you had run-ins that have made that particularly difficult in your reporting for being for the people?
Oh, yeah. So off the record versus on background versus totally. So there's a very interesting thing. I used to say when I was in college, oh, I'm not going to let people go off the record. That isn't fair. You know, here's the thing. If it's in the middle of an interview, I almost included this clip. Somebody had asked to go off the record when I had asked them a question. It was, for example, I was talking to the leader of an anti-abortion movement. When the abortion amendment was going to be on the ballot, there was a lot of language about, well, it's going to allow children to get gender affirming care to, I think they called it sex change in the commercials, sex change procedures. There was nothing from, legal readings and from the attorney generals that said that. So I asked the anti-abortion person, I said, hey, where does it explicitly say anything about transgender children? And he, in the middle of it, goes, can we cut here? And I go, no, we cannot do that. So there are circumstances where that still happens. Even despite being a watchdog journalist, people will still try to do it, but you got to record them on camera asking to go off the record. That's really what you have to do. And I included that in my story. I included that he said he wanted to go off the record. Has he ever spoken to me again? No. But it's important for the people to know that he didn't have an answer. When it comes to off the record, it can be very, very useful. I use off the record a lot. I have my sources. There's this thing called source management, where basically if you get to be friendly, not in it like a bad way, but you get to know a lawmaker or an activist or somebody who's influential in some way, they might have some information to give you. They'll feel more comfortable saying off the record and providing you that information. Obviously, you have to see the pros and the cons. I personally will never break off the record with a source. When somebody says that, immediately to me, it's okay, this is off the record. However, if people try to do it in the middle of a conversation where we already are on the record, I will never, ever accept that. So it's very give or take. It's also how well you know the person and how well it matters to the story. But yes, off the record can be kind of confusing. And I will upfront reject off the record conversations. And I will say, no, we have to be on the record. I'm not letting you do this off the record. So either I'm going to say that you asked to go off the record and I said no, and I will include that in the story. So it's up to you.
What made you decide that you were willing to just live under that much stress and pressure? When did that moment come where you said, yeah, this is what I want to do, and I'm willing to take the risk and take the heat?
When I was 10, I did not realize it was going to be like it is now. But when I was 10, I watched a documentary about Nellie Bly, who was the first female immersion investigative reporter. She went undercover into she has a book, 10 Days or in a Madhouse. Basically, it's about the asylums that were used in New York City and in New York that were supposed to be psychiatric care, but really the standards of living there were horrific. So she went undercover and exposed what was going on inside. And I was like, I didn't know that that was something you could do. And so it mixed sort of the sense of writing that I loved, also exposing injustice. I think I always really had like a strong sense of that. Like, I don't want to sound self-important at all, but I always had a very strong sense of like, I don't like that. I don't think it's right. People should know about that. And so really that's how it started from, and I know that that's like a unique story where a lot of people don't know what they want to do, but it really solidified then when I was, growing up and going through high school. I had a TV production class and I loved it. And I just was fascinated with everything revolving around the government. And, I didn't like politicians. And it's not that I don't like politicians, but I just don't trust them. And I don't think that people should inherently trust them. So it's more of a getting answers for other people kind of aspect. I don't care if I get put under stress as long as other people can know that I'm fighting to find out what could be impacting them.
Where do you want to go from here? Where do you want your career to go?
That's a good question. So I love what I do. I love working out of the State House. I love, bothering politicians all day. And especially, the state government is so much more important than Congress is to your state and to your life. If you live in Ohio, the State House is so much more important. They actually impact your life on a day-to-day basis, where Congress does not. Congress, I don't even know what they do. Clearly nothing right now. But when it comes to the impact that has on people, I grew up in Ohio. I grew up in Northeast Ohio. I grew up in the Cleveland suburbs. So my parents are still here. I'm still here. Cleveland is a great city, but I love Columbus. I love being at the State House. It's interesting because I thought, I would work out of the State House for a couple of years and then go to DC. And I still think eventually I might end up in DC. But for this, I love what I do, and I love knowing everybody there. I love being able to know the insides. And I also have stories that I'm working on that I want to see through, like corruption scandals and like other kinds of allegations of wrongdoing in the government. I want to, see those through, but I also think that it's so important as local news is dying. I think it's important for people who know the process and who know the state and who know the cities to stay in local news. So I'm not sure. I had a interesting story. So I interned at 60 Minutes and I was promoted to a researcher the summer before I graduated college. And I thought for sure that I was just going to go there. I was going to be behind the scenes. I was never going to be on TV. I didn't care about being on TV. And I just wanted to do the investigative work for that. I think there's still room for that, going back to that. But right now, I am happy being on TV. We'll see how long that lasts.
How supportive is your news director or your, bosses?
They definitely, they put up with a lot from me. I think it definitely surprised them at first with the type of pushback I was getting from people, but now they understand. They see it. And they are super, super supportive. They've been super supportive since from the beginning. I think they realized, oh, whoa, like after the first bigger story that I did, that this was going to be kind of the persona that I have at the State House. And they're super supportive. After the Frank LaRose thing, I walked into the newsroom and my direct boss was like, I wanted to tweet back. And I was like, no, do not do that. So they are supportive, but it's also because I've gained their trust and them knowing she's doing the right thing. She knows what she's doing. I have my managers check over my scripts, especially if they're controversial ones. So they are supportive. But I haven't always worked for newsrooms that aren't that supportive. My first market, I did an investigation into a school busing system that left, one man dead and 60 in the hospital over a course of a couple months. And the school was very upset with the story, despite giving the chance to talk to us. And my news director ended up putting edited my story after it was already published, because they said that I can't be causing bad relationships with that school district. So I always ask, if I'm interviewing for a job, how do you deal with controversy and how do you deal with people being mad? Because I never want to have to deal with that again, and no journalist does, because it's not fair to us and it's also not fair to the citizens. Just because a politician gets mad at you doesn't mean that your story's wrong.
Any other questions? Victoria? Go ahead.
How do you actually get the guts to like tell someone off? Because I couldn't do that despite wanting to do this.
Yeah, so it takes time. I was super, super scared when I first started doing it. And I think I just kind of got it in my head. Like, I feel like there's such a separation between my life personally and like who I am as a reporter. And I think that that's a good kind of separation of balance, you know? But really, it all comes down to, are you getting the answers for the people? Or would I be upset if I was watching this and someone didn't ask this? Would I think that somebody's getting away with something? And with that kind of background, I'm definitely, it pushes me forward. Now it's just second nature. But when I was first starting out asking aggressive questions or being invasive, I definitely was more nervous. And I definitely wasn't as strong in my language, or I didn't press as hard. Now it's second nature. However, there are other amazing reporters that could be considered, investigative reporters, or could be considered kind of watchdogs that don't ask the same way I do. I mean, I ask in a very blunt way. I ask in sometimes argumentative ways because it elicits a reaction. So not everybody's like that. You don't have to ask them like that. You don't have to be as blunt. As long as you are asking the question or asking the crux of the question, that's fine. There have been times where I've had people pull me aside after press conferences being like, did you have to say it like that? Like, did you have to ask it like that? Oftentimes I'll phrase, like if you saw with the Joe Dieters one, I'll phrase it as a question with, I'll kind of make a statement and then phrase a question saying, you appointed somebody with no judicial experience who was a friend of the family. Walk me through that decision-making process. At this point, I would probably just be like, why did you appoint somebody who has no judicial experience? Well, why? Why did you think that was a good idea? I've asked things like that before. And yeah, it is argumentative, but it gets the response. So really what you're looking for is a response. But you got to work your way up to it for sure.
You probably have to be pretty well researched before you ask any questions.
Oh, you cannot ask a question like that if you don't know the answer already. That's the thing. A lot of times when I ask questions that are that aggressive, it's because I already know the answer, or it's because I know what they would say, or it's because I don't want them to just skirt around. And oftentimes I'll ask something and it'll be, more calm at the beginning, but the more that they try to get away with it, so we call it like filibustering, basically when somebody tries to prevent an answer from coming out, they'll try to get you off track by bringing up other things or just try to give you a blanket statement that has nothing to do with the question. So that's when you really got to hammer them home. But yes, you have to be well researched, because if you just show up to a press conference and start arguing, you're going to have no credibility. The reason why I'm able to ask the questions that I am is because they know my reputation by now, and they know, okay, well, if she's asking it like this, then she knows. Or if she's asking it like this, then like this is a legitimate thing that she's looked into. I'm never going to ask a question like that if I don't have the background knowledge of, okay, why am I asking this? Why is it important? What facts do I have of all the other players in this?
Okay, we're running up on time here, but I do want to ask one last question. If you could briefly tell us, what do you think the state of journalism and democracy is right now?
I think that it's great that people are still invested in journalism and still going to school for journalism and still interested in that aspect. I think that right now it's pretty scary. I think that local news is dying, unfortunately. Reporters don't make that much money. And a lot of people are saying, hey, it's really stressful. And so people are leaving. And when reporters leave the news industry because of the long hours or the hate that they're getting online or the pushback from politicians, things like that, I think that that's all bad for democracy. But I think that it's great that there are still people who are interested in it. And I think there's still people that want to hold others accountable. But I do think that the journalism industry needs to adapt better to what's going on. I think that it's still run by people who don't fully know how to work technology, like work social media. And I think that Gen Z is going to be able to help with that, I hope.
All right. Okay, thank you very much, Morgan. That was great. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
No, thanks for having me.
All right, we do have some sheets here for those who are here for extra credit. Dr. Montague has a sheet herself, and then I have another sheet that if you're not in one of her classes, you can sign off on too, to say you were here. But again, Morgan, you did a great job. I think you really highlighted a lot of things and educated us on how you go about what you're doing. Thank you.
Of course, and once again, if anybody ever has anything, feel free to reach out to me. Anything revolving around journalism or democracy, or even if you just want to tour the State House, let me know.
Okay, great. We'll be there.
Bye.